I thought it was love, turns out it was complicated. The dating profile was a whim, a late-night act of desperation fueled by cheap wine and an overwhelming sense of loneliness. I'd been single for far too long, focusing solely on my freelance graphic design work, and the small apartment I called home felt increasingly like a gilded cage. Then I saw Ethan. His profile picture was intriguing, a slightly blurred image of him standing in front of a towering oak tree. The autumn leaves a vibrant tapestry of reds and golds behind him. He had kind eyes, a strong jawline, and an air of quiet confidence that drew me in. We messaged back and forth for weeks, discovering a shared love of old movies, obscure books, and long walks in nature. He was intelligent, witty, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, not just my measurements. He told me he was a software developer working remotely, which explained the blurred picture. He valued his privacy, he said. I didn't push. I was too caught up in the feeling of connection, something I hadn't experienced in years. Then came the invitation. He owned a farmhouse in upstate New York, he explained, a place he was slowly renovating. He suggested I come visit, promising me a weekend of crisp air, stunning scenery, and good company. Chloe, my best friend, raised her eyebrows when I told her. Upstate New York. Sarah, you barely know this guy. It sounds like the start of a horror movie. I brushed off her concerns. Chloe was always the cautious one, the grounded social worker who saw red flags everywhere. I needed a change, an adventure, and Ethan seemed like the perfect escape. The drive was longer than I anticipated, the highway gradually shrinking into winding country roads. The air grew colder, the trees thicker, the world outside my car morphing into a landscape of brooding beauty. Finally, I arrived. The farmhouse was even more breathtaking than I'd imagined. Set back from the road, nestled amongst towering pines and maples, it was a vision of rustic charm. The stone walls were covered in ivy, the porch swings swayed gently in the breeze, and smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Ethan was waiting for me on the porch, a warm smile on his face. He was taller than I expected, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. He helped me with my bags, ushered me inside, and immediately made me feel at home. The interior was a mix of old and new, with exposed beams, hardwood floors, and modern furniture. It was cozy, inviting, and felt like a world away from my cramped city apartment. The weekend was idyllic. We hiked through the woods, explored the nearby town, and spent evenings curled up by the fire, talking for hours. Ethan was attentive, thoughtful, and incredibly charming. He listened intently when I spoke, asked insightful questions, and made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. By the time Sunday rolled around, I was completely smitten. He asked me to stay longer. He said he could use the company, that he enjoyed having me around. He even suggested I move in permanently. It was crazy, I knew, but the thought of leaving him, of going back to my lonely apartment, filled me with dread. I said yes. Chloe was livid. Sarah, this is insane. You've known him for what, a month? You're throwing your entire life away for a guy you met online. I argued that it wasn't just a fling, that I truly felt a connection with Ethan. She wasn't convinced. Just be careful, okay? Promise me you'll keep your eyes open. Moving in was easy. I packed up my apartment, said goodbye to the city, and embraced my new life in the country. At first, it was wonderful. We spent our days working side by side, me on my graphic design projects, him on his mysterious software development. We cooked together, explored the surrounding area, and made love in front of the crackling fireplace. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small things, barely noticeable at first. Unexplained noises in the night, flickering lights, objects moving on their own. I dismissed them as my imagination, the quirks of an old house. But they persisted, growing more frequent, more unsettling. Then there was Ethan's behavior. He became increasingly secretive, spending long hours locked in his home office, his work becoming vaguer and vaguer. He discouraged me from exploring the woods, telling me they were dangerous, full of wild animals and treacherous terrain. He started asking more questions about my friends, my family, my past. He wanted to know everything, but he revealed almost nothing about himself. I tried to talk to him about it, but he brushed off my concerns. He said I was being paranoid, that I was letting my imagination run wild. He blamed it on the stress of the move, the isolation of the country. He'd pull me close, whisper sweet nothings in my ear, and I'd find myself believing him, wanting to believe him. One afternoon, while Ethan was out running errands, I decided to do some exploring on my own. I started in the basement, a dark, damp space filled with cobwebs and forgotten relics. It was unsettling, and I hadn't ventured down there since moving in. As I rummaged through the dusty boxes, I noticed a section of wall that looked slightly different, a seam that ran along the stones. Curiosity piqued, I pushed against it, and to my surprise it gave way, revealing a hidden room. The room was small, barely larger than a closet, but it was filled with strange and disturbing things. Books with faded covers and titles in languages I didn't recognize lined the shelves. Symbols, unlike anything I'd ever seen, were etched into the walls. There were stacks of notebooks filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and what appeared to be research related to local folklore and disappearances. My blood ran cold. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest. When Ethan got home, I confronted him. He was furious. "What were you doing down there?" "I told you not to go in the basement." "What is that room, Ethan? What are you hiding from me?" He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. "It's nothing," he said finally. "Just some old books and papers. A hobby of mine, a hobby." "What kind of hobby involves hidden rooms and strange symbols?" He became defensive, his voice rising. "It's none of your business. I have a right to my privacy." I didn't believe him. I knew he was lying. The next day I drove into town to see if I could find out more about the house. The town was small, almost forgotten, with a single main street lined with antique shops and a diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1950s. I started at the library, hoping to find some information about the history of the farmhouse. The librarian, a kind elderly woman with a warm smile, was initially helpful, but when I mentioned Ethan's name, her face clouded over. "Ethan, he's a bit of a recluse, isn't he? Doesn't come into town much." I asked if she knew anything about the history of the house. "That old place, some say it's got a troubled past. Folks used to whisper about strange things happening out there. But that's just old wives' tales, I suppose." She didn't elaborate. She suddenly became busy with shelving books. I decided to try the diner. I ordered a coffee and a slice of apple pie and listened to the conversations around me. I overheard snippets of gossip about local families, the weather, and the recent string of disappearances that had plagued the town. People seemed on edge. As I paid my bill, I noticed the waitress staring at me. She was young, with tired eyes and a weary smile. "You're living out at the old Hawthorne place, aren't you?" she asked, wiping down the counter. I nodded. "With Ethan, right?" I nodded again. She hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering her voice. "He's different. Just be careful out there, okay? Some folks say he's not who he seems." That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing. I needed answers. I decided to call Chloe. "I think I've made a mistake," I said, my voice trembling. "Something's not right, Chloe. Ethan's hiding something. I'm scared." Chloe didn't hesitate. "I'm coming up there," she said. "I'll be there first thing in the morning." While I waited for Chloe, I did some more digging. I searched Ethan's name online, trying to find more information about his work, his past. I found very little. No social media presence, no professional website, nothing. It was as if he didn't exist before he met me. Then I stumbled upon something. An old forum post, a message from a user claiming to be a former co-worker of Ethan's. The post was vague, but it mentioned accusations of stalking, strange obsessions, and a history of unstable behavior. I felt a chill run down my spine. I sent the user a message, hoping to get more information. The next morning, Chloe arrived, her face etched with worry. "Okay, tell me everything," she said, settling into the armchair. I told her about the strange occurrences in the house, Ethan's secretive behavior, the hidden room, the librarian, the waitress, and the forum post. Chloe listened intently, her expression growing more and more concerned. "Sarah, this is serious. You need to get out of here. I know, but I don't know where to go. He's isolated me. I don't have any money, no car. I'm trapped. We'll figure something out. First, we need to find out more about Ethan." Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the former co-worker. He agreed to talk to me, but he insisted on meeting in person in a public place. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in a nearby town later that afternoon. Chloe and I drove to the coffee shop, our hearts pounding in our chests. David, the former co-worker, was already there, sitting at a table in the corner. He was a nervous-looking man with darting eyes and a hesitant voice. He glanced around repeatedly, as if expecting someone to appear. He confirmed the information in the forum post. Ethan had been obsessed with a female co-worker, stalking her, sending her disturbing messages. He'd been fired when his behavior escalated. "He's not a safe person," David said, his voice trembling. "He's capable of anything." He handed me a photograph he'd managed to secretly snap of Ethan from years ago. It was grainy and unclear, but it showed Ethan standing outside the woman's apartment building. He looked gaunt, almost feral. As we left the coffee shop, I saw a police car parked across the street. A man in a suit was standing next to it, talking on his phone. He looked familiar. It was Detective Miller, the detective investigating the disappearances in town. He'd come by the farmhouse once, asking questions about Ethan. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I snuck into his office. I tried to open his computer, but it was password protected. Desperate, I began searching through his desk. I found a file folder labeled Research. Inside were newspaper clippings about the disappearances, articles about local folklore, and maps of the surrounding woods marked with strange symbols. There was also a photograph of me taken without my knowledge as I was walking through the woods. On the back, he had written mine. I slammed the folder shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get out. Now, I went to wake Chloe, but she wasn't in her room. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the basement. She was nowhere to be found. Panic set in. Then I heard a noise, a creaking sound coming from upstairs. I crept up the stairs, my heart in my throat. As I reached the top, I saw Ethan standing in the doorway of his office, his eyes glowing in the dim light. He was holding something in his hand, something shiny and metallic. "Where's Chloe?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He smiled, a chilling, unsettling smile. "She's gone, just like the others." I knew then that I was in danger, real, mortal danger. I turned to run, but he grabbed my arm, his grip like a vise. We struggled, and I managed to break free, fleeing down the stairs and out the front door. I ran into the woods, blindly, desperately, not knowing where I was going. I could hear Ethan behind me, his footsteps pounding on the ground. The woods were dark, the trees towering over me like silent witnesses. I stumbled and fell, scraping my knees and hands, but I kept running, driven by fear and adrenaline. I eventually lost him, hiding behind a thicket of bushes, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I pulled out my cell phone, but there was no signal. I was alone, lost, and terrified. As I continued to move through the woods, I found a clearing, and in the clearing was a stone altar. Carved with the same symbols that Ethan had in his hidden room, it was stained with what looked like old blood. I was so sick. I stumbled back, trying to get out of the area. Then I heard Ethan's voice. "Sarah, my love, I've been looking for you." I turned and saw him standing at the edge of the clearing, a hunting knife in his hand. His eyes were wild, his face contorted with rage. "I loved you, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "But you betrayed me. You snooped around. You asked too many questions. Now you have to pay the price." He lunged at me and I screamed, a primal scream of terror. Just then a figure emerged from the trees, a man in a dark suit, a gun in his hand. It was Detective Miller. "Ethan, stop," he shouted. Ethan ignored him, continuing his advance. Detective Miller fired his gun, hitting Ethan in the shoulder. Ethan stumbled, dropping the knife, but he quickly recovered, lunging at the detective. A struggle ensued, a brutal, desperate fight for survival. I watched in horror as the two men grappled with each other, exchanging blows, rolling on the ground. Finally, Detective Miller managed to gain the upper hand, knocking Ethan unconscious. He was hurt, badly. Detective Miller looked at me, his face pale. "Get out of here," he said, his voice strained. "Go to town, call for help. Get yourself somewhere safe." I didn't hesitate. I ran, not stopping until I reached the main road. I flagged down a passing car, and the driver took me to the police station in the next town over. I told them everything about Ethan, about the disappearances, about the hidden room, about the altar in the woods. The police launched a massive search for Ethan, but he was never found. They searched the farmhouse, the woods, the surrounding area, but he had vanished without a trace. Chloe was never found either. I left town, changed my name, and tried to start a new life. But I can't escape the memories, the nightmares, the constant fear that Ethan is still out there, watching me, waiting for his chance to finish what he started. I keep seeing him in crowds, a fleeting glimpse of his face, a familiar gesture. I'm always looking over my shoulder. A few weeks ago, a package arrived at my new apartment. There was no return address. Inside was a small, intricately carved wooden box. I hadn't seen it since childhood when I told Ethan the story about how it was given to me by my grandmother. The box was empty. I know he's still out there. This isn't over.